Hello and welcome to the Google Cloud Advanced Computing Community. Very happy to have everybody with us today for this great session titled Decoding the Genesis Mission, a new era for AI-driven science with Rick Stevens. Before we get into that, I want to welcome everybody here. We have a growing list of people online and I see people adding every second. Happy to have everybody here. This is going to be a great session. It will be recorded and posted to YouTube later as well, but happy to have all of you here who can make it in real time. I am Jay Boisseau. I'm the Google Cloud Advanced Computing Community Director. I'm also an advanced computing strategist at Google. I have 30 years behind me with San Diego Supercomputer Center, Texas Advanced Computing Center, and Dell before Google. Very happy to be with you and leading this community. This advanced computing community covers lots of different technology areas that happen to map all of my interests: high performance computing, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and more. The community itself is a community of practice. So for those of you who are first timers, everyone is welcome. The intent of this is to elevate expertise that will accelerate innovation and discovery. So we try to share with you a mix of very practical, professional information that helps you get your jobs done and helps your organizations and companies. We also bring to you thought leaders like today, so you can understand where these fields are going and how your company or organization or research project or program should adapt to these emerging technologies and the opportunities that they present. We do this with a program that includes these weekly webinars. We love having people on these so that they can be live and ask questions of our expert speakers. We also have roughly bi-monthly in-person events, workshops, and other kinds of events to connect people in real life and to build these collaborations and help people find new partners, new customers, new mentors, new collaborators. We have a great program coming up for 2026, and we look forward to all of you being part of this community. So who is the community for? Well, it's for everyone, but as I said, it's a community of practice. So in some ways, the target groups are Google's employees, the partners that help us provide this extensive ecosystem for scientific and technical computing, and the customers who use Google and this ecosystem for this. But as I said, it's really for everybody. And so we will have potential customers in this call and potential partners. There'll be analysts and media and just the general public. So we welcome anyone who's interested in advanced computing technologies to be part of this community, to share, to learn, to be part of this and communicate with all of us. We do have a website that can keep you up to date on future events. We also have a YouTube channel that you can go to watch videos of past events as well. And we hope you'll check out both of those. If you go to the website, you can sign up to be on the email list and you'll get our email blast every week. So you'll know about the events that are coming up through email, but you can also just check the website. I do encourage you to check out the YouTube channel as well, because a lot of the, all of the past events are on there, and many of them can be digested even in just audio fashion. Most of our events do have slides, but our speakers are particularly adept at explaining things and sharing information in such a way that you could almost treat the YouTube channel as a podcast source as well. We have a few community guidelines that we want to make everybody aware of. Obviously, professional conduct required at all times in the chat space, and that means respectful communication. The core principle is we are all here to learn from our speakers and from each other. We do encourage you to use the chat feature to introduce yourself and to ask questions of each other. Now, for the speakers, there's a Q&A feature. If you look at the 3x3 tiled icon in the bottom right corner, if you click on that, you'll see a place to submit questions. So if you have questions you want to ask the speaker, I will select from the list that is submitted during the event. I will use that Q&A feature at the end of the event. So use Q&A to queue up questions you have for Rick at the end, and use chat to communicate with each other in real time. We also have these meet emojis on the bottom. So we encourage their use to applaud, for example, or agree with the point, etc. And you can see some of my colleagues showing you how some of these are used here as well. Don't overuse them such that Rick gets distracted by seeing all these across the screen while he's talking, but absolutely do use them to agree with points and to applaud. And now with that, very happy to introduce a longtime friend and collaborator, one of the world's experts in computational science, including high performance computing and now AI for science, Rick Stevens of Argonne National Lab. So Rick, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jay. Audio still good? All right, let me bring up the slides here. Ready to present, yes. Okay, I'm going to share window. Okay, can you guys see the screen?
Looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to talk today about Genesis mission, which is the new national AI for science, national security and energy initiative that's been launched by the Department of Energy. And just a side note, some of these fun slides, I use the Google Notebook LM, so that's just a cool feature. This slide in particular, which merged the DOE logo with the quantum computing chandelier. Okay, so some of you probably are aware of the fact that over the last 4 or 5 years, those of us in the national labs have been trying to launch a large-scale AI for science initiative. We've had workshops, meetings, planning, and so forth. And with the new administration, there was an opportunity to reframe it and pitch it. And we're super fortunate to have Dario Gil come in as the Undersecretary for Science. So he was a leader at IBM Research for many years in semiconductor work, and then later in quantum. And he led IBM Research, so he's very aware of the state-of-the-art targets for advanced computing. He's now at DOE, and one of his first actions essentially was to get this AI initiative going. And the name is Genesis Mission. The framing of this is trying to be really groundbreaking, I would say, in trying to rev up the U.S. National level awareness and investment in AI and associated infrastructure and applications, which I'll dive into in a minute, to create a new way of doing science and a new way of doing engineering and technology development. And it's being framed as kind of in the same spirit as the Manhattan Project or the Apollo program. There's a massive effort to change what's possible and what's new. So if you think of it as kind of phase 3 of the great eras of American science, that wouldn't be completely wrong. One of the arguments for doing a massive AI initiative is that the scientific output as a function of resources going into it has been stagnating or actually decreasing over time. And this is a well-studied phenomenon, or it isn't a recent phenomenon. It's been going on for decades. And there's some hypotheses about why this might be happening. One is that low-hanging fruit has disappeared, or science problems are getting harder, or there's friction of larger and larger teams needing to attack open questions and so on. But one of the notions is that AI and high-performance computing coupled with quantum may be able to tackle this challenge, which is trying to increase scientific output as a function of input. And that framing is one of the important goals of Genesis Mission. So the long-term mission is to double U.S. research productivity over the next 10 years, and not just in national labs or government-related things, but across the entire ecosystem, entire country. The U.S. spends about $1 trillion a year in R&D, about 3.5% of GDP. And the goal of Genesis is to basically have the impact as if we were spending, say, twice as much, something like that. And we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. The other thing that's, I think, as guiding kind of the directionality here is that we're starting to see across many fields, chemistry, biology, material science, other areas of science and engineering, this emergence of a concept of a closed loop discovery kind of paradigm, where we have AI with maybe agentic networks able to come up with hypotheses, able to do simulations, control simulations, maybe searching for a new material or say designing a protein, then carrying out experiments to validate the conjectures that the AI and simulations have come up with, and then take measurements, feed that information back into the models and loop. And there's a number of companies, startups, that are essentially built around this concept. I won't list them here, but there's about a half a dozen or so that in the US and more internationally that are building business models essentially on this concept. And this idea, we think, has legs. It was not possible until recently to imagine doing this because AI wasn't powerful enough. And we didn't have really the ability to glue everything together. And of course, while we've had robotics for a long time and lab automation, we didn't really have this idea of it being integrated. So this is another kind of overarching thing that's happening. So if you think about why DOE and why doing this now, so one of the reasons is that DOE has, of course, been a leader in high performance computing for decades, and we have exascale computers. We have the world's largest collection of large-scale experimental facilities under one kind of logical roof. There's about 30 user facilities that DOE manages, and we have a huge volume of scientific data from historical operations of facilities, or 80 years of data in many areas. And so this idea of an initiative that integrates all of that and identifies these things called lighthouse challenges. Lighthouse challenges are just another term for what grand challenges, but aimed in the future that could be attackable with AI. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But this idea is, can we accelerate in energy, basic science, national security by integrating all of these things with AI and to build a platform to do that? So that's the motivation for Genesis. We have a nice logo and a nice slide deck here. So it's this national initiative to build a platform. What we mean by platform here is the combination of the hardware, software stack, data sets, and AI models needed to accelerate discovery science, national security, and drive energy. That's the whole goal of it in one sentence, essentially. The other thing that we're trying to do is enable us to work on harder problems. And so increasing research productivity doesn't just mean the same people produce, say, twice as many papers. That's not what we're after. What we're trying to do is bring in timelines. So something that that a community might believe is possible in 10 years, try to bring that in, say, by a factor of 2, say to 5 years, or say there are problems that we believe are too complicated, say a generalized method for, I don't know, designing proteins for, say, room temperature catalysts, for example. People might not have been willing to tackle that complexity of that complex of a problem, but with something like Genesis and the platform, maybe making our scientists bolder and more fearless to go after harder problems. So conceptually, I mentioned there's the platform, and then there are these grand challenges that we call lighthouses. Let me dive into how this is structured a bit. So at the top is the overall mission. It's designed to be not just a DOE initiative, but an all-of-government initiative or an interagency initiative. So you will see over the next year or two additional agencies plugging in, NIH, NSF, Commerce, and so forth. So we imagine that it will eventually pull in many, many agencies. There are these 3 primary pillars: targets in science, being motivated by the Office of Science; targets in energy, being motivated by the applied energy programs in DOE; and targets in national security, initially being targeted by the National Nuclear Security Agency, but increasingly DOW and the intelligence community and so on will play a role in the national security. The idea of the initiative is to build cross-cutting capability to support all of these pillars. And we've identified so far about 7 big cross-cutting AI research thrusts that are needed to advance these things, ranging from like physics-informed AI, things like pins and so forth, multi-scale integration. The science that we want to do spans over 10 to the 30th orders of magnitude, or 10 to the 30 orders of magnitude. So getting AI that can reason over spatial and temporal scales like that is a huge challenge. Many of the problems have a real-time component or a need for a high-speed, faster than real-time digital twin that can be used, say, like in a control system, and integrating that with AI as part of it. We need AI systems that we can put into mission-critical things. Of course, we need to understand how to build and enhance foundation models in all these areas of science, and how to manage the knowledge content, among other things. So there's cross-cutting AI. On the science side, we'll just give you a fast kind of overview of this. So in discovery science, think of this as the kinds of science that we do in the DOE's Office of Science. So there's things like underlying physics, and one of the targets in the near term is building like a foundation model for the cosmic frontier, right, for cosmology, and integrating all kinds of data sets and experiments and simulations related to things, searching for like dark matter, for example, and trying to understand how do we advance the standard model. We have needs for things like accelerators, like models, AI models that would allow us to automatically tune accelerators and control accelerators with AI as opposed to, say, humans. We're interested in searching for new quantum algorithms that give us fundamental, say, quantum advantage on new problems. And this general problem I mentioned of having self-driving labs is a key basic science goal. Another thing is to shift towards inverse design. So we want to design materials from first principles that have the properties we want, or proteins that can manipulate substrates precisely in a way that we want. We want to turn biology into an engineering science in that way, and understand things like the water cycle. Water is becoming even more important as we build out commercial infrastructure. And can we predict, say, the water cycle out 10, 20, 50 years, for example? So we've organized initial projects, what we call seed model teams, on molecular dynamics, particle physics, and quantum. But there's more that will be coming, and you'll hear about them over the next couple of weeks and months. On the energy side, it's pretty much a broad attack. So we're interested in accelerating fusion. One of the ideas of a lighthouse problem for fusion is to bring fusion online to the power grid in an economically viable fashion, say by 2035. And that requires pulling in timelines, and including things like autonomous operation of fusion reactors, but also like solving the tritium breeding cycle. In fission reactors, we're interested in fully automated operation of SMRs that reduce the human component, make them more reliable, more deployable, and modernizing the grid, right? The grid's enormously complex with a mixture of renewables and base load, and making that more resilient and more responsive is a key goal. Another one that's maybe not so obvious is going after subsurface assets. So not just enhancing things like natural gas production, but also understanding how we might turn the subsurface into a fundamental, say, geothermal resource that's independent of location by enabling like super deep drilling, for example. Manufacturing and critical minerals are also related to energy, and these are thrust areas for the initiative, and even things like improving how data center efficiency is in bounds for the energy component of the initiative. In national security, there's some overlapping functions. So one of the main challenges we have is we have a large collection of data since the Manhattan Project, actually, and much of that data is not in a AI-ready form, and getting it into an AI-ready form is critical. Working out how to connect the basic science component of national security with the production facilities DOE operates is a target, and then really reducing red tape and improving efficiency of all the processes on the national security side. So these are our targets. Of course, there's specific technical targets, which I can't talk about, but one thing that is very clear, that if we have a world-leading AI capability, there's many targets in national security where we want to apply this. So those are like the lighthouse, where the lighthouse are going. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. The other goal of the initiative is to build a platform, and what we mean by the platform here is a little bit ambitious. It was quite ambitious, actually, but we have exascale computers, we have cloud contracts, partnerships with cloud vendors like Google Cloud and Amazon and Microsoft and so on. We also have large-scale data, as I mentioned, robotic labs that we're building out and so on. And we want all of that to be integrated into a single capability that is accessible to thousands of scientists. And in addition to access to these raw facilities, access to large-scale AI capabilities from frontier labs like Google DeepMind, but also local models running, on-prem in a way that we can consume very large amounts of tokens to advance problems. And I'll say more about that in a minute. I think I already mentioned this. The way to think about the platform is it's more like the operating system that we're trying to build, but it's distributed. It's built on ESNet, built it on the integrated research infrastructure that DOE is trying to build to connect all the facilities. But it also includes models and data. And we have teams working on inventory of models, not just foundation general purpose models, multimodal models that we're building, but domain-specific models in biology, chemistry, material science, cosmology, and so forth. These all become assets on the platform. And then the underlying data sets that DOE has, whether it's a material science or cosmology, high energy physics, etc., all of those become assets in the platform that users of the platform can integrate with low overhead into building new models or testing hypotheses and so forth. So I mentioned lighthouses. One of the things that we in the executive order that launched the initiative back in November was that the department was to deliver a list of high priority problems to the White House. A week ago on Friday, 2 weeks ago on Friday, there was a list of 27 of these lighthouse problems that were sent over to OSTP and hopefully will be made public very soon. And these problems were chosen to be not just important grand challenges that if we solve them advance kind of US leadership in science and technology, but they also provide a driver function for development of the platform. So think of the lighthouse problems or the applications as having a requirement setting or a pull on the platform development, and there'd be a feedback between advances we make in the platform and the ability to advance the application and back and forth. So these things are supposed to demonstrate transformative AI, not just say workflows on existing AI, but advances in AI, like increasing the modality of the AI, or as I mentioned before, the ability to reason over physics, multi-scale problems, but also to build on top of the current best state-of-the-art AI, right? So that we're building agentic networks that use the best of frontier models augmented with domain-specific models. And these things, as much of it as possible, will be public and open. Of course, some data sets can't be open, and we have the provision for partnerships with companies where data might be proprietary. But the intent here is to have a significant amount of openness that would allow additional partners and academics and so on to build on this. So I think I mentioned this executive order on the right here. So these are some of the goals that we have. So we delivered this list of national challenges to OSTP. They'll be published back. There's an ongoing effort right now to create an inventory and mapping of federal compute resources that can become part of the platform. We're currently working on a data set inventory that'll become part of the platform. And this AI-directed lab capabilities includes things like automated labs, model cards, and so forth. We will have a significant initial set of demonstrations of the platform in March, further demonstrations in July, and kind of a release of the initial, you could think of it as, I guess, 1.0 version of the platform, next fall. So I mentioned already some of these categories, I think, in all the list, but this is like a short list of the kinds of examples in the grand challenges. Here's one that's in a little bit more detail. This is one of the projects we have. We have about 16 initial seed projects that represent sampling of these. grand challenges. This one is called the Prometheus Challenge. This is led by Idaho with participation from Argonne and Oak Ridge and a number of fission reactor development companies. But the goal here is to build a autonomous reactor that can essentially operate itself and has intrinsic safety and so forth. And the reason for this is that if you're going to hit one of the strategic goals that the U.S. has of deploying something like 400 gigawatts of additional nuclear by 2050, you've got to accelerate the current rate at which we can deploy reactors, and you've got to reduce the operating costs substantially. Our target here is to reduce operating costs by like 70%. And to make this as much as possible manufactured in factories as opposed to on site, so that this becomes quite possible. And there's aggressive technical milestones. And AI is involved in each of those stages here. Now, when I talk about data, I mentioned organizing the DOE data, building models from that, but we're also very interested in automating the process of going from raw data to AI-ready data. And we're making progress on that. We're also going to stand up what we hope will be the world's most comprehensive data repository for training AI models on science and technology. So that's something that we'll have prototypes of this spring, and we'll scale it up. And that's something we want to collaborate with partners like Google and others on standing it up and making that available to the broad community. I mentioned these tools from raw to AI ready. That's critical. But we're also going to need to develop new representations for learning on scientific data. Many of the scientific data types are very different from the data types that are in commercial consumer-facing models, right? First, we'll have simulation data, say in say atmospheric science, where we have many fields, many variables, say in combustion, many variables being carried in the flow field, many higher order tensors, for example, that need to be represented. In the case of molecular systems, where we have Hamiltonian data and orbital data and so forth, these things need to be ingested in a way that models can learn how to compute on these natural representations. And so we have efforts, cross-cutting efforts on multimodal reasoning models. So take the best of frontier reasoning models and couple them with a much richer multimodal front end so they can reason over these scientific data types. And we're also very interested in scaling out agentics on the large-scale infrastructure. And I would argue to develop what amounts to, a real science of large-scale data. So these are goals we have in data. On the model side, I mentioned, and we say model here, we don't just mean LLM. We often will mean some kind of foundation model that's trained very broadly that can be used to do inference on specific cases. But we also talk about surrogate models. So a surrogate model is an AI model that takes data from a simulation or from a set of simulations, maybe a large library of simulations, and produces a model that does the same does a similar computation, but much more efficiently using some kind of machine learning kernel that can act as a proxy or a surrogate for that simulation. So, for example, a materials design, rather than solving density functional theory models for specific materials, you'd have a fast surrogate can approximate the DFT, so you could do a large-scale search, maybe 1,000 or 10,000 times faster than you could using conventional methods. And then when you have a set of candidates, go back to the highly accurate method. So that kind of surrogate is needed, plugging those into digital twins and all other kinds of models. So models here is a very broad term. We're also trying to build scalable pipelines for both pre-training and post-training work, like as you expect in a frontier situation, and then plugging these into agentic workflows. So models in our terminology also includes workflows. Here's an example. Here's a cartoon example. I think this was Nano Banana, but this is an example of, say, what a cartoon agentic workflow might look like if you're trying to design a system for a fusion reactor to breed tritium. Fusion reactors burn deuterium and tritium, but tritium has a very short half-life, and the global supply of tritium is very limited at any given time because it's not a naturally occurring thing. It doesn't stick around very long. So we have to create tritium, And so a fusion reactor has to have a net positive production of tritium, and it has to be created usually in some kind of lithium blanket or a lithium lead blanket or liquid structure. And this is a really complex problem. You have to model the neutronics. You have to come up with some idea about the geometry of these systems, the thermal properties of them, the neutron absorption properties, and so forth. So we need to combine things like atomistic simulations, structural simulations, neutronics, and do this in an integrated fashion to loop over design. So it involves many different kinds of physics models with an AI orchestrator. So this is like an example of a prototype workflow that we're building. Now, we need a lot of compute, and we don't just need compute for modeling and simulation. We need a large-scale compute for the AI inference. And one of the challenges in trying to talk about AI for science is trying to come up with a way of talking about scaling compute that's similar to how we used to talk about it in HPC, right? We used to talk about moving from, say, petascale to exascale, which is a factor of 1,000. We could draw, a diagram or a chart right up and to the right and say, well, if we have 1,000 fold improvement, we can increase the resolution of a simulation or, reduce the time steps or whatever. For AI, we don't have a way to talk about that exactly yet in AI for science. We, of course, do talk about token production in LLMs, and we're trying to relate like how many trillions of tokens we might need to do an inference to solve a given problem. And I would say this is very much a work in progress. But this table kind of gives you a ballpark estimate of some of the estimates we've come up with based on early experiments. Like, for example, to do an autonomous nuclear reactor design, right? Like how many trillion tokens might be needed to do that? And the estimate right now is like 10 to 50 trillion tokens. And you can think about like what that might cost if you're buying tokens, say in Gemini or something like that. But you can see these different estimates, like co-scientists here, which is something that we're collaborating with Google DeepMind on. And we have an understanding of how token consumptive they are, but how many users in the future will want to do co-scientist type things? What's the diffusion rate going to be, and so on. That's what we're interested in. Our current estimate, based across the complex, for people that are just using state-of-the-art models to do like vibe coding, is that we need about 120 trillion tokens a year to drive the vibe coding that we want to do. That's in addition to much of this kind of list. So we need a huge amount of tokens. That means we're going to need to deploy infrastructure. We're going to need to buy tokens from partners and really innovate in high performance AI. Now, on the infrastructure side, so the platform is, as I mentioned, it's the data, it's the models, and it's the infrastructure. The infrastructure side is being handled on the Office of Science side, at least by a project called the American Science Cloud, being led by Oak Ridge, but with Argonne and Berkeley and most of the labs helping, standing up, integrating their compute resources and experimental resources with that. There's another activity called the ModCon that I lead that's really partnering with all the applications and the AI cross-cutting that sits on top of this infrastructure platform. So in the ModCon, we have teams around data, workflows, and cross-cutting AI, like I mentioned. Science Cloud is organized around a set of services needed to support the platform capabilities that I mentioned, and there's a whole other talk around how that's organized. And then partnerships. This is not something that DOE can do alone or individual labs can do. It's a kind of all of system thing. There's been a strong emphasis on building partnerships from the very beginning, and a structure that's being put in place for that. There were around 20 or so memorandums of understanding signed back in December of key companies partnering with DOE, including Google, including NVIDIA and Microsoft and AWS and so forth, main AI companies, and then a lot more companies on the runway that are maybe more specific to different application areas, materials or in aerospace and so on. So lots of companies will be involved. In the MOUs, there were companies organized across 7 categories. So AI model providers, cloud and infrastructure, semiconductors, systems integrators, AI hardware, cloud folks, and nonprofits. And these MOUs aren't public, but to give you a flavor of like what companies are proposing as part of the DOE partnerships, some of them address like how to plug into the ecosystem, maybe doing phased deployments of technology into the DOE, integrating quantum with AI, open science activities, and so forth. So lots of connectivity. There's still, this is still early days, right? The initiative's only been up and running officially since November, and we're expecting there to be some calls in the next few weeks to encourage more engagement across the ecosystem. So with that, I'll stop. I think Jay's going to rematerialize here in a second, and we can do Q&A. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Rick. That's a great overview. We have some questions, I believe, and I'm going to jump to these now. And also, everyone on the call, feel free to submit questions for me to ask Rick. You go to the Q&A feature, which is in the 3x3 dots in the bottom right corner. Click on that, and then you'll see a Q&A feature in there. So, Rick, let's go ahead and get started. I see, my friend Michael McManus asked a question. Hi, Rick. Can you comment on the work that In Silico Medicine has been doing on merging HPC and AI for drug discovery?
Well, we've been tracking them for quite a long time, and I know the principals there. I think they're doing great work. It's an example of what we expect to see more of, where you have AI pipelines, you have traditional data that you've trained the AI on, and you're using it to accelerate some element of the workflow. In the case of In Silico, of course, you're trying to go from an idea, say, to a candidate compound in a very short amount of time. And the question becomes, like, how much of the testing and clinical process, can be compressed, but going from an idea to a compound that you could start lab experiments in, I think in one of their papers, it was less than 40 days. I think maybe now it's even 40 hours or something like that. So I think it's very exciting. And we want to see that same idea applied in many areas, material science, chemistry, and so on.
Great. Let's see. And Diarmid Buckley asks, are the reasoning models likely to inherit features of semantic graphs as opposed to text handling LLMs?
In the future, I think so. One of the directions that reasoning models and models in general are going is to integrate to external resources, via RAG type techniques. And a common strategy today is to couple a reasoning model to a large-scale knowledge graph that externalizes the graph component of that, but also to generate large amounts of reasoning traces and then fine-tune or somehow adjust the model to be able to navigate large-scale reasoning traces as a first-order data type. And I think that merges those ideas together nicely.
And I'm going to ask a related question to that. Is part of the Genesis mission looking at other methods of AI beyond machine learning and deep learning techniques, at looking at active inference techniques or neurosymbolic techniques or other methods of AI to drive science?
Yeah, at this point, I don't think anything's off the table. I think the initiative, of course, is aimed at having impact in science and technology. So while there's going to be basic investments in AI methods, I think in order for it to have traction in Genesis, right, it has to somehow show some benefit in science and technology use cases as opposed to, say, just a benchmark case, right? But we want, one of the challenges we have is how to involve the academic sector. And I think really expanding the class of AI methods would be a good target for a lot of university research as part of Genesis.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I noticed at the conference we were both at last week. There was all this discussion about the models and not much discussion about future AI techniques as well and other ways to expand on that. So I know we're in the early days of using models and building agents for science. And so, of course, I expected most of the attention to be on that. But I hope.
Well, I think, yeah, my sense is that we're just at the beginning of starting to see AI being used to improve AI, and which is, Jay, the old saying that I'd rather write programs that write programs than write programs, right? And nowadays it's kind of like I'd rather work on AI that's going to build AI than build AI. So the point here is that, and a lot of the frontier labs, of course, are deep into this already, which is we've got to get into some self-bootstrapping mechanism, because to think that humans are going to be the ones that always know the best way to do this is a little bit naive. I think my sense is that this idea of AI as a tool for discovery needs to be turned back onto itself. And I think that is where it will get super interesting. Algorithm discovery. And of course, Google DeepMind's already been doing a lot of work in this area. Of course, many others are too. But starting to see this idea of applying AI to discover better AI algorithms for science, I think is going to be a especially fun thing to do.
Yeah. Google DeepMind's doing some very interesting work there, and I need to have them give a presentation in this series as well.
For sure.
Bill Turner asks, and I'm not quite sure I understand his question, can I maintain ownership of individual assets, or does it become shared asset-ish that is yours? And I assume he's referring to data assets for partners in this broader ecosystem that you're putting together.
Yeah, so the concept we have is trying to work out how what he's asking for can be done. That is, as I mentioned, a lot of the platform will be open, a lot of the data is open, a lot of the technology will be open. However, we've got lots of partners that have proprietary things and they want to collaborate, and we're working on finding ways of protecting all of that, whether it's data models and so on, and plugging it in a way that people can leverage it and use it, but without having to absorb the IP. And we have a whole partnership team, intellectual property and partnership team that's working on that. And of course, that'll also ultimately result in a set of technical capabilities that we have to implement. But that idea is baked into the initiative pretty deeply, actually.
All right. Timur asks, for the private companies interested in partnering with and contributing to the mission, what's the process? Is there a specific point of contact or route involved?
There is. I'm trying to remember the email. So there is a way to do this. There's an email address, which I should have had on a slide, that I will send to Jay when I remember what it is, that gives a company a way into the DOE process itself, to get on the mailing list and to get plugged into the process of how to become a partner at the DOE level. At the same time, every lab has a mechanism for bringing partners in as well. So basically, a company, all they have to do is know somebody at a lab, or find out somebody at a lab, or use this mechanism for headquarters, and they can get in the process. And then there's a whole mechanism for participating in whatever it means, and participating also in future funding rounds and so on.
All right. Rick, I had a question for you about the closed loop process. And of course, at Google, we have technologies that help with most or all of those phases that you mentioned. But the one that I think is really interesting in terms of fully closing the loop is some analysis step, an AI-driven analysis step that actually confirms that what you computed or the results of the experiment or something are actually valid before you can feed the results of that back into the next ideation phase to come up with the next thing to do. Yeah. So can you describe that part a little bit? What is the state of the art right now in AI for analysis of results that it has perhaps not seen before, because it's science, it's research, it's making discoveries. So how do you use AI to automate that?
I mean, we're using it now when we do large-scale lab experiments and we get the raw data, and before we invest a lot of our own time, we will ingest all the data into a model and say, what do you think of this experiment, right? And we're often amazed at how comprehensive the analysis can be. And if we prompt the model to suggest conjectures that might be, visible in the data, it does a pretty good job. And then we have to, of course, do the hard work of validating these observations that the model's making, or our own data. I'm pretty optimistic that they will make progress there. There's kind of two pieces of this that I think are in tension. Right now, AI is also capable of generating hypotheses, but often they're not super interesting, or they're not like the magical, light bulb goes off and you say, if that was true, everything would make sense, right? You're looking for these really beautiful hypotheses out of the sea of easy conjectures. So there needs to be research in that part, improving the hypothesis generation, and there needs to be research on the other side of it, which is, okay, here's some data, and here's what we thought was going on. Was that actually what happened? Is this data consistent with that? Is it consistent with some other hypothesis? If so, what is it? And so those two things are super interesting. It's wide open right now, right? And one thing that's quite interesting, I was in a discussion with Ian Foster last night. Actually, he's in Australia. We were slacking, and we were debating about these issues, as we do every day, pretty much. But the idea that popped into our head was that AI for science is a lot more like AI for debugging, okay, as opposed to like coding, right? So we're going to see a lot of progress on AI for coding. And there was this great blog post, I think, in Cursor, where they ran for like a couple of, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, right, and doing some massive thing. But if you think about your own experience, when you're debugging, you're trying to help somebody debug a system that neither of you understand, like you didn't write the code, but you're debugging somebody else's code, that's more like science discovery, right? There's something there. Something's not behaving the way that you expect, but you didn't write the code. Just as like nature wrote the code, and you're trying to figure out what did nature do. Well, that's really science discovery. And so we need to figure out, because experiments are often slow and expensive, we need to figure out some parallel paradigm that we can really refine strategy in the models on. And we think maybe debugging is one like that, but we'd like to hear other people's ideas too, because in coding, the beauty is that you can go as fast as you can generate and then, test the code and keep going, right? So it's not, I don't have to wait for cells to grow or a material to process, right? I can go very fast. We're concerned that the rate at which we can improve these autonomous loops will be bottlenecked on the slowest time component, like the experiment. So one of the challenges is, how do we accelerate that? So I think there's lots to be done here. More than enough for the whole community. It's just like...
All right, let's see. Benedict asks, industry is focused on LLMs right now, and things are being measured in terms of tokens. How do you see that changing with this more science-focused project? How do you see the science AI methods interacting with LLMs?
So right now we see pretty much everything we do in science, we can do some version of it with LLMs, right? And I say LLM here, it could be a vision model that's tokenizing things as well. So tokens here, I think when we think of them as just whatever quanta the model is using for information, not necessarily literally the way a LLM is doing tokenization, although that's typically the instance of that. But we need to be able to talk about some fundamental unit, like a flop. Like in HPC, we talk about flops. And we know that memory motion is as important or more important than flops, but we can talk about complexity of a problem in terms of flops or memory actions and so on. In the AI, we need to be able to talk about the computational complexity of a given problem, a given reasoning trace, a given derivation of physics or whatever, or a given, say, protocol design, in terms of some integral unit that we can measure. Because if we're trying to figure out like how big of a computer I need to buy from Jay, right, in order to drive my science, I have to have some translation between, okay, I've got all these TPUs or whatever, and what's the throughput that I'm going to get on my science problem. And I would say that we're not in a good place yet with this kind of terminology, because tokens aren't exactly probably the right thing, because they're too tied a little bit maybe to LLMs. But we can measure, like I ask, Gemini to prove a theorem, I can actually quantify how many thinking tokens it used and how much the output is. And so I have a place to start. But we need something that generalizes probably better than current notions of token.
Yeah, agreed. What we really want is insights per second or something like that. But it's their insights are generated by tokens, and that's the computation.
Sure.
Yeah. So I understand.
Yeah, I
how
mean, it's
that.
proofs per second or something. I mean, there's something we used to, years ago when we worked in logic programming or theorem proving, we would talk about logical inferences per second, which is another unit that we use a lot, and that was boiled down to a very simple kind of logic operation, not a flop, but a logic operation, and that was probably too fine grained for current ways of thinking about AI. But a token is a very fine grained thing, also.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, it
And
depends. The actual amount of compute needed depends on the scale and type of the model. So that's not exactly it's not a model independent measure, but.
yeah, and as V, one of our folks in the chat window says, information density reflected in tokens does not necessarily reflect quality. And of course, that's true as well.
Yeah, one of my students always asks me for my $1 million tokens. Like what he wants is like the most valuable token I can generate,
Well, Rick, let me ask you one more question about international cooperation. So you mentioned you're partnering a lot of this, and there's partnering among labs, there's partnering across agencies, there's partnering with industry. What is the international collaboration model for Genesis Mission?
So I think it's still being developed. As you know, both of us were in Japan last week, and Dario Gil was there with a DOE delegation, and we're starting to explore the notion of international partnerships. And I think there's an interest in doing it. And there's interest in doing it probably with a handful of strategically chosen partners. And it's ongoing. I think you might hear some announcements about that maybe in March. But it is on the radar. And of course, the whole initiative is around US and open, let's say allies, kind of the free world ecosystem. And so you might expect that our partners would come from selected countries in that space, and ones that we have long-standing, deep collaborations, because we need to move fast and we need to do this in a way that has a lot of deep understanding on both sides, so we can move fast. So I think that's like the notion. But there will be international partners. There also will be academic partners, and that's on a fast track as well. So we expect to have some announcements around academic partners and international partners in the next couple of months.
Great. So lots probably to share even by the ISC conference in.
I think so. I think it'll become more clear by ISC, like what we're doing internationally, and also how the landscape lays out in the US even better.
All right. Well, let's everybody give Rick another round of applause. You can use the meat emojis at the bottom of the screen. Rick, thank you so much for that.
Okay.
Really great overview. Looking forward to sharing this on our YouTube channel as well. I'm sure a lot more people will see it there. And Mary, if you can bring back our slides, we have just a few final announcements about upcoming events. I should tell all of our community, we will not have a session next week because of internal planning meetings at Google that will require the entire team's attendance at those. So we are taking the week off next week, but we're back on February 17th with a really interesting presentation from how we're transitioning from supercomputers inside of data centers to massive AI infrastructure that involves multiple data centers working together. This is going to be a great talk by Benjamin Sloss. He gave a talk at the SC25 conference on this topic, but you'll be able to hear his updated version of it here in this series on February 17th. On February 19th, we have an in-person all-day workshop at Google Sunnyvale. So we hope that some of you will make it. We already have great registrations for that, so we hope many of you will join us there in Sunnyvale. And unlike these sessions that focus on one topic per hour, we'll have many different topics of that day, including hands-on labs with high-performance computing and AI technologies. So please join us for that. Even if you're an experienced HPC person, there's going to be some interesting content for you there. And we will be showing you our latest AI technologies in much the same spirit as Rick talked about in his presentation today, how these different technologies can help you with hypothesis generation and ideation, with coding and with other aspects of the scientific process. And then on February 24th, a really interesting presentation from devices and desktops to the cloud, a presentation from a friend of mine and colleague on massive scale hybrid computing. So leveraging everything from your local devices to the cloud in a seamless kind of way. So we hope you'll join us for that as well. Some closing comments. Please make sure and check out our website. Our website has all of our upcoming events. It's how you can register for the mail list, how you can register for the in-person workshop, etc. You can sign up for the email list there. You see the link here. And again, remember, you can catch up on sessions on our YouTube channel, and we encourage you to share those as well. So if you enjoyed today's session and you have colleagues that you think want to know more about the Genesis mission, please share this. It should be online in a day or two on our YouTube channel. And just as a reminder, there's many free ways to try out Google Cloud, and many of our technologies are available with certain token counts for free. We also have ways you can try the Google Cloud infrastructure for high performance computing and AI model training. With that, I really want to thank the entire team. We have a wonderful team that brings these events to you. Thank you to all of my colleagues that help make these events possible. And with that, thank all of you for being here today. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks for our next weekly webinar, and then hopefully in Sunnyvale a couple of days after that for our day-long workshop. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week, and thanks for joining us.